Hi, Eugene.
And we're live. It is Monday, March 8th, 2021, 2200 Zulu. It is 2 o'clock p.m. on the West Coast, 5 o'clock 02 p.m. on the East Coast, 10 p.m. 02 in London. And you can just continue this game as long as you want to play it. We are
You
not.
don't.
We can't hear.
We can't, Eugene. That's what I was going to try to tell you. So.
Uh-oh. Let's try this and see if it works. Otherwise, we will have. Can we hear you now?
No.
We're going to take you out and bring you back in.
We'll try that. Bummer.
That usually fixes things, but not always. So, while we are doing this, I have an important monologue about birds and peanuts. So, can we hear you now, Eugene?
Eugene,
No.
try just really quickly. Let me just walk him through this. So, Eugene, go to the top of your your little square that has your face in it. And if you hover above at the top of that little square, a menu should drop down, and you should see a gear. If you go over to the gear, it should say change camera and mic, and you can make sure that your input is correct for your headset.
But
Still
speaking will not
muted.
help because we cannot hear you.
But he's testing it. We don't know if he can. Oh, you'll have to.
Yeah, so go to the gear
Nope.
and
Oh wait,
then
there.
it'll reconnect you. And
Yes.
then
Now he might. Yes.
now I think you can hear him.
Testing?
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Voila!
Okay.
The tech problems are part of the show on In Lieu of Fun. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Eugene Volokh.
Hi.
And we're allowed to hear him. He is a professor of law at the University of California. He is the godfather of group legal blogs. He conspires every day and yet has never been prosecuted for it. And it is good to have you back on the show.
It's always great to be on. Ben, what's on your T-shirt? I see intriguingly
This is
the
a
top.
Biden inaugural T-shirt.
Oh, well, there you go.
And I decided to wear it today because I found myself unusually pleased that Donald Trump was not president anymore today, because I woke up and I didn't have to respond to anything the president said. There was nothing forcing me to say, to do that. And I just felt elated. And so I thought I would wear an inaugural T-shirt.
All right. That sounds good.
Yeah. We were just discussing everything that. Well, we're gonna have to save your birds and peanuts story, Ben, unless you really
Yes.
want to tell it.
No. We will save it for the next tech problem.
Okay. Eugene, it's so nice to see you. I was just telling Ben that you're starting a new journal. And so I thought that maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And Ben has been waging a war on legal journals for quite some time, so he has feelings.
So I would like an official treaty that we will be non-combatants in your war.
Well,
I'm not sure we'll be allies.
I got to hear about your journal
So-
before I commit myself to
It's a pretty cool.
non-belligerent.
It's a great. Sorry, I'm
There's
excited
only
about
one
it.
journal that I have a non-belligerency understanding with, and that's the green bag.
Oh, well, I am certainly non-belligerent myself with the green bag. In fact, I'm a fan of it. I think I've published some things in it. And I think maybe we are going to be non-belligerent for much the same reason. Can I share my screen
By
so that
all
you can
means,
see?
if you
Yep.
go to that menu above, there should be a share screen option.
Okay, so let's see if I can actually make that work. Okay,
If
share
you go to
screen.
share screen, and then usually I don't know what kind of application.
Oh, application window. Okay,
But
so I'm gonna.
application window is the best option.
Got it. So I'm gonna share. This is our logo, the Journal of Free Speech Law. That's our name. We're big believers in descriptive labels. So Greenbag actually totally not the way we name ourselves. They have got their own idea. We have a much more descriptive idea. We are a faculty-edited journal, a peer-reviewed journal, although we have a somewhat unusual, not unprecedented, but unusual model, which I call the robe and gown model. That of our 30-odd board members, editorial board members, about a third are judges. And generally speaking, they're judges who had been academics. One example is Mariano Florentino Cuellar, who is in the California Supreme Court, who'd been a professor at Stanford. Another is Douglas Ginsburg, I suppose, on the D.C. Circuit, who'd been a professor at Yale back in the day. Or in some situations, they've either taught extensively, or Judge Robert Sack on the Second Circuit. I don't think he was ever an academic, but he is the author of one of the two leading treatises on libel law. So that's that. I think judges like that combine the best of understanding what's really useful for the legal system as a practical endeavor, but at the same time understanding the rules of the academic game. So we generally do blind screening, not completely blind. I see who the author is, and occasionally I'm the reviewer, so I'm not blind to the identity of the person, but when I circulate it to other reviewers, I remove the person's name, and for anything that's written by somebody I know well, or somebody who's an editorial board member, I would just keep myself out of it. So I think this is kind of maybe not best practice by way of standards of peer-reviewed journals, but a better practice in many ways that I think student-edited journals.
Oh my
So
God,
can I
I'm
ask a few questions about this?
in such strong agreement with that. I first published one of the first places I published after my Rebecca Tishner encouraged me to publish with the Copyright Society of the USA, which was peer-reviewed, and
There you go.
I was very proud to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. That meant so much. As a
Do your listeners know that, in fact, in law, your viewers know that, in fact, in law, almost all of the leading journals are student-edited, which is to say not just proofread and line-edited, but actually the articles are selected by students. This is very unusual by standards of the Academy, and I should say I've never been a militant critic of that. It's a system that, as so many things, has the vices of its virtues and the virtues of its vices. It's worked not badly in many ways for the Legal Academy, but I think especially in light of some of the political winds that have been blowing, and just in light of the fact that it's gotten easier than ever before to have new faculty-edited journals, I think it's good to add some more faculty-edited journals to the ecosystem.
Okay, so I have 3 questions about your new journal.
3 questions.
Yes, which is you have dealt with one of the outrages of the law review as a form, but there are several others that need to be eradicated from under the face of God. And I'm just going to ask you whether your new journal complies with my
I should say we're agnostic on the whole face of God question.
I'm agnostic on it too, except for rhetorical purposes. But question number 1, does your journal require footnotes for self-evidently obvious statements?
You mean like the one time I had a law review article published to the journal, and I was mentioning the First Amendment, and they added a footnote that said U.S. Const. Amend 1?
For
No.
example.
No.
Or, if you state something that is a matter of common knowledge, like that, the Constitution was promulgated in 1787 and ratified in 1789, they will have a citation for each proposition.
Not our cup of tea. This having been said, we believe in faculty, or not shouldn't say faculty, author discretion. If the author wants to have that, we're not going to go out of our way to get rid of it.
But there's
we
not
surely
gonna be
won't insist on
somebody
it.
whose job it is to document every sentence, no matter how transparently obvious it is.
I should say, I like, some people are really upset by law review footnotes. I think a lot of footnotes are quite quite useful because they're, as a practical matter, a future user of the article may find
They're
it very
breadcrumbs.
helpful. Exactly, follow the trail of breadcrumbs. This having been said, I'm totally with you that a lot of the breadcrumbs are kind of icky, nasty stuff
And
like.
ass covering. Let's be honest. A lot of it.
Oh, I don't want to work that in with the
I-
breadcrumbs.
I
That just doesn't go well.
I have to show Eugene Volokh that I read his piece from 1997, and he might be mad at me if not. So I'm going to jerry-rig a sentence to include a footnote.
Right.
To,
Well, we certainly don't demand that. We're not going to frown on it. The fact is, often citations are there in part to kind of acknowledge that somebody else has been there before you in a related context. We don't think there's anything particularly bad because, as we know, in the legal academy, the rule is the person who dies with the most citations wins.
Yeah, but
So
that's
we don't want to
always
interfere
or
with that.
incur.
That is going to be Orrin Kerr and Mark Levely, but you could be in the top 10%, let's say. But no, we certainly are going to not insist on needless citation, which you're right has been kind of an unpleasant and unnecessary feature of much law review writing.
Okay, second key question. Do articles in this journal have to refer to themselves in the third person by stating, instead of stating a point, say, this article makes the point that?
No.
Good.
They neither have to have this article makes the point that X instead of X, nor is there a prohibition on saying, I think X, or I've
Good.
concluded
So
X.
the first person is not
Right.
verboten?
This having been said, I have used the first person not infrequently in my articles and student-edited publications, and
I've had
I
to
think
fight
many.
with students about that.
I do think it varies from journal to journal, but generally speaking, we're just fine with that.
Okay, good.
I mean,
So-
you don't want to have it too much of it because you don't want
No,
everything
'cause
be
you don't
about
wanna be
you,
self-involved,
right?
But you don't.
Right.
You also don't want to cover up self-involvement by
It's true.
replacing the first
Exactly.
person singular with this article, because that's
Exactly.
actually self-involved. This article makes the important
Right.
contribution
Right.
of showing that I am self-involved.
Right.
Is just as true or not true as I am self-involved.
I didn't know that
okay.
these are your three. Okay, so I'm
No, no.
learning something, Eugene, because I know that Ben has a hobby horse of picking on law and law reviews.
I hate law reviews.
Yeah, but
Well,
but there's something. Okay, I'm gonna make a case
Wait,
for
wait,
law
wait,
reviews
wait,
in a
hang
second.
on.
But I want to
Before
get to
you-
your third
wait,
point.
Last question.
yes.
The literature review.
Oh, I'm
Should it
totally
or
against
should
it.
or not be eradicated from the face of the earth?
Well, again, if somebody wants to do this, I will actually probably gently nudge them away. But if they feel like they need to do this, sometimes it's actually useful for readers.
What do you mean
but
the literature review? Do you mean the book reviews?
No. So in the law review form, the modern law review form, the old law review form was you stated a thesis and then argued for it. But the modern law review form is you have here is the thesis that this article will advance, introduction, which is basically your executive summary. Then you have a 25-page literature review section that's basically
yes.
about showing people that you are aware that their articles existed so that they don't vote against your tenure. Then you come to the thesis of the article, the second half of which is always defensive against preemptive criticism. It might be argued that, and then you try to respond preemptively to a whole bunch of things, and then you have a one-paragraph conclusion, which always seems perfunctory given that the article is 75 pages. And so the whole form is tortured so that nobody would actually want to read it. And so my concerns with the law review are that it is an entirely supply-side product that has no concern for the sensibilities of the poor reader. And
So I totally appreciate your concerns, Ben. I do think they're a little overstated in that I think they may reflect kind of unusually poor practices in some law reviews or just in some articles. I will say I've published probably at this point 90 or so law review articles, of which probably all but 5 have been in student edited journals, and of which maybe half were submitted through the usual kind of competitive selection track. And I've basically never done a literature survey. And I always get annoyed also when I see an article that says Professor X says this, and Professor Y says that, and Professor Z says this, and I say that. No, I want citations, but I don't insist that you cite me in the text. That's what footnotes are for. And there's a nice little format, which is, see this article arguing X, and if you want to add a sentence saying, but I think this is wrong for reasons stated in part Y. So I think that's fine. But again, that's not a problem, I think, endemic to law reviews generally. So I think maybe you should be fighting a war against a subset of student-edited law reviews.
Yeah, so this is
but definitely not against us. Definitely not against us. But can I also tell you? Can I also tell you?
Non-belligerence until you launch Operation Barbarossa against us.
Well, being somebody whose mother was born in Kiev in 1941. In February, someone whose father spent the war in Leningrad, which was then Leningrad. Let me be on the record as being opposed to Operation Barbarossa. But all this having been said, I think the important point is that we're going to be selecting articles based on the real knowledge of the field, both on the part of faculty members and judges, based on our understanding of what is useful, and not just to the academy and not just to the bench and not just to the bar, but preferably to all three, or maybe a mix. Some articles useful to one, some articles useful to another, and with a minimum of kind of, well, this is what the rules say. Because, the bottom line is we've been at it for, most of us, for many decades, and, rules are useful when the editors are people who are just entering the field. They may not have a lot of kind of informed experience judgment of their own, but I think sound discretion is going to be our watchword for formatting and other similar issues.
I generally think, just as like a person who does come from like the social sciences and who does come from peer reviewed journals, which have their own problems to be sure. Like let's not act like that is some type of rosy, equitable resolution of perfect scholarship that ends up over in that world. But I do think that there deserves to be much more of a presence of people who have kind of various and I think that the robe and gown kind of phenomenon is particularly useful here, because this is also gets to kind of what I think is a slowly growing, maybe it's rapidly growing gap between judges who write scholarship and between scholars who become judges. And so it used to, you had Posner, Easterbrook, you had obviously Guido, you have a number of kind of illustrious judges that have Laval. Copyright Laval is canon, obviously, and then there's just kind of but these are like slowly disappearing, and maybe this would be a wonderful way to also get kind of judges back into like the business of publishing law review articles. Do you disagree? You're making a face.
So I'm always hesitant of claims, well, things are changed from the past, because in order to say that things have changed from the past, we need to first know the incidence of things in the past, second, know the incidence of things in the present, and third, being able to compare the two. And the fact is, obviously, we all know about Easterbrook and Posner, let's say, a classic example, or Ginsburg, of judges appointed, say, during the Reagan administration, or the other Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Breyer, who were scholars who were appointed judges in the Carter administration. But, we remember them perhaps in part because they played a role besides just writing opinions. So maybe we remember them too much, or I didn't say too much. Maybe remember them out of proportion to the actual incidents of
Oh,
some judges.
that is certainly true.
And
Like,
today, for example, three of the judges, at least on our board, are Trump appointees, who are former academics: Naomi Rao on the D.C. Circuit, Stefanos Bibas on the Third Circuit, and David Strass on the Eighth Circuit. And so I think there may be quite a few academics. Obviously, Justice Barrett, who before that was Judge Barrett, had been appointed from the Academy, and there are others as well. So I'm not sure that there are fewer judges who have an academic background or who continue to write articles. It's possible, but I would like to see some stats.
I mean, I do think there are. I mean, fewer Richard Posners, right? So now maybe you could say,
but
well,
I take Eugene's point that like that he's also just such a sui generous. Like there's just something like, and he's so high profile that we probably overrepresent.
Right.
Like we're probably biased a little bit towards. So I get his point, and like there are. And now I'm like thinking about it, and you're right, Eugene. Like I'm thinking about like a number of judges who are state judges who published some pieces with Dan Gahan actually that I remember, and like a number of other kind of judges that are less well known that have published pieces. And so you're right. It's like
but hang on. I take your point that I would want to see that you would want to see the numbers, but I do think there is an argument, right? So when let's talk left and right. Robert Bork was a very important scholar of antitrust.
It's true.
And was a DC Circuit judge. And he was important in his role on the bench. He was important in his role in the Academy. Richard Posner is important in about 10 fields in the Academy, and he has written more judicial opinions than anybody since Oliver Wendell Holmes, and maybe more than, I don't know what the competition is between them at this point. There is, I don't know of anybody recent on the bench who's who everybody from left to right would say their academic contribution is foundational. And I don't know of anybody from of the left that's true of, and I don't know of anybody of the right that's true of. It does seem to me.
Why not Guido?
So Guido is of the generation of Bob Bork and
okay.
And
okay.
Right.
Sorry.
I'm
sorry.
saying,
Yes.
I'm
okay.
saying
Sorry.
my generation.
Right.
Who is the
Foundational
person
is
who's
rare.
50? Who is really important academically and a major figure in the judiciary. It seems to me, if you look at like who is the Posner-esque figure in the judiciary, who's just somebody who everybody cites, some people, it would be somebody like, on the left, a David Tatel, or a Merrick, center, a kind of Merrick Garland, or on the right. But it's people who don't have strong academic presences. Am I wrong?
Well, so I think it's never been a very great number of people who were really kind of top academics in their field. So, for example, my understanding is that Justice Ginsburg, who I do think had a successful career as a scholar, especially given that the bar was
again different generations.
Right. But she was not somebody who I think was foundational as a scholar. She was a successful scholar and a very important litigator.
I was going to actually say she was more foundational as a litigator. In fact, I would argue.
Right. If you want an example of a recently appointed judge who, by definition, hasn't been able to make yet much of a splash as a judge because he's only been on the bench for a short while, but had been a very successful scholar, Stefanos Bibas.
Yes.
He is one of the leading criminal procedure scholars in the country, alongside probably Oren Kerr, at the very, very top of the people who are who are loosely conservative or conservative-ish. Among criminal procedure scholars. I just did a quick search. His articles have been cited, I think, by over 2,000 law review articles. That's a pretty high count. So he's somebody who is an illustrious scholar, and maybe he's not a Posner. I think very highly of Judge Bibas and before Professor Bibas, but again, very few people can be Posners.
Sure, but let me suggest that in the Reagan administration, Orrin Kerr gets appointed to the federal bench. Now, I think Orrin doesn't.
Wait,
want
are you
to
saying because there was a Reagan administration, or are you saying because that
No,
in
I
the
think
day
the
of
Reagan
Reagan, like
administration-
in that era?
The Reagan administration actively looked around the country and said,
Right.
who are the very finest conservative judicial minds around?
Right.
They were, by the way, quite ecumenical about what people forget this about the Reagan administration. They were quite ecumenical about what it counted as a conservative mind. So Richard Posner, who advocated a market for babies, counted. That is not something that the Trump administration would have done.
Well,
now, I don't know that Orrin wanted a judicial appointment, so it may be a very fair,
but
a less than fair thing. But I do think that as the aperture of acceptability narrows,
I'm not sure that
on
it's
both
such a narrow
left and
aperture.
right.
So I think that may be part of it. I think Orrin, my sense is, had from the get-go been very publicly opposed to President Trump, and I certainly appreciate his arguments for doing so. I was publicly opposed to President Trump as well, so I'm not faulting Orrin for that, but it certainly makes sense that that an administration might be reluctant to appoint someone who's not just not exactly where they are politically, but has actually publicly and sharply excoriated the president. So I think it's to his credit that he was willing to do that, notwithstanding the possible effects on his appointability in the Trump administration. But it's unsurprising that the Trump administration, when they reached out for academics, I don't think I have no reason to think that Judges Bibas, Rao, or Strass were Trump enthusiasts, but presumably there were people who weren't as publicly critical of the administration.
My argument is not that there's a grave injustice in Orrin Kerr not getting a judicial appointment. My argument is simply that the aperture of acceptability is somewhat narrower and less imaginative than it was during the Reagan administration. I think when you look back at the Reagan era judges, one thing that is interesting is how relatively philosophically diverse they are compared to what is now the orthodoxy of. And Posner is, as always, the outlying extreme example of that. But there are other examples of it too, particularly in the Ninth Circuit. There's just like what it meant to be a conservative judge was a little bit less defined then than I think it is now.
Just to kind of like bring it home to kind of and back to the New Journal, I still think that this is a tremendous achievement to have brought so many people from such a diverse background together. It is truly like a really just illustrious like group of experts that have on free speech and from various angles, every angle that you could possibly have imagined in the law. And so I'm very excited about it. And I think that this has been, I don't know if you've seen, Eugene, but like there has been a lot of chatter about this being a particularly horrible cycle, I think in part because students are just completely overwhelmed by everything with the pandemic and everything else. But this has been a particularly horrible cycle for law reviews this last month or two. And so like I think that like there's kind of it feels good to think that there's kind of going to be something else out there that'll maybe work on a different timeline, that'll be more responsive, right, that is a little bit more thoughtful about kind of the different way in which maybe adjust to a more normal kind of schedule, or not a normal schedule, or a different type of schedule. What are you planning on running for your schedule, by the way? Are you going to adhere to the same cycle?
No, absolutely not. But first, let me just step back to something you said before. There's no doubt. I think you're quite right that faculty edited journals have their own pathologies historically. We're going to try to avoid some of them, but probably can't avoid all of them. I like there being more options. It may be that a mix of student edited journals and faculty edited journals is a better combination than either all faculty edited or all student. But indeed, one reason is that we are not slaves to the academic calendar. This is one thing that when I litigate cases, which I often do through the amicus brief clinic I run at UCLA, I'm often reminded that the litigation calendar does not match the academic calendar. You could have a brief due at some point; it's finals. Well, okay, you're not going to persuade the judge that should affect things. So, for example, we are going to accept articles year-round, including during the winter and when a lot of journals, including especially top journals, are closed, and during the summer when many journals are closed as well. We can also publish things very, very quickly because we don't have to go through the student-run editorial process. So if you say this is an article you want published within a month, I think we have a very good shot at being able to publish within a month. We'd probably
that's so
say
great.
You have to hire your own RA to do site checking, which is going to be generally the rule as well. We'd actually like to see the report to make sure that the RA has done a good job, but it's fine. You don't have to count on our people. Usually faculty have access to RAs at their own schools for that, research assistants. And likewise, we'll have some students do proofreading just to make sure it doesn't come out looking shoddy. But generally speaking, we're not going to give you intrusive edits in any case, and the consequence is we can publish very quickly. Likewise, we insist on submissions that are not simultaneous, so exclusive submissions, because I can't send an article to one of my board members, especially one of the judges, and then say, oops, sorry, you reviewed it, you liked it, but it was all wasted because it's being published somewhere else. But on the other hand, we promise we will give you an answer within 2 weeks. And so far we're averaging 1 week. And we can make that promise because we are much more...
Super awesome. Run for your money, Lawfare. Run. I will say I'm excited about this, and I think it is exactly what, frankly, I think it is there's another journal that is peer reviewed that just started as well.
Oh yes. You're thinking of Cass Sunstein's, Randy Kennedy's, and Martha Minnow's Journal of Law and Equality. Excellent to see that's happening. I
thought that both of them. I was like, what the hell's going on? But I love it. I'm here for it. This is great. And I know, and Ben, to your point, I think it's going to make legal scholarship so much sharper and better.
Hey, look, my War on Law Review articles would not exist if there were adult supervision of most law reviews. That's the fundamental. All jokes aside, and there are many jokes to be had at the expense of law review articles and law reviews. I have two basic complaints about law journals. One is that they are dismissive of policy, and the other is that they are done without concern for the reader.
Yes, that's always a problem.
And I think that any written product that is on a supply side model and does not imagine the demand side consequences is going to be an editorial failure. That said, what you're describing sounds to me extremely sensible and valuable, and I therefore refrain from all jokes at the expense of this new project.
Well, I appreciate that, and yes, I was very happy to hear that Sunstein, Kennedy, and Minnow, who are top people in their field, are setting up theirs, and I'm hoping this will be a pattern. Like, for example, that's especially so in fields where which
Gus
are less.
Hurwitz and I have been talking about doing this for law and tech for a while, but I'm so junior and I just don't have time to do this, and but we've thought about this for a while.
I think it would be great in a lot of fields, and I'm hoping that what will happen is we'll work out some mechanism for making this work that that others will say, wow, they made it work without a huge amount of with a lot of effort, but without backbreaking amounts of effort. It's coming out smoothly and simply. Maybe others will copy it, which I'm all in favor of. I will say, by the way, I should just because I think it's only fair. I want to thank the Stanton Foundation, which actually provided a grant, a multi-year grant to support us. This allows us to actually publish in print as well. It's an interesting question whether publication in print really matters these days, but I do think it's still something that a lot of people find as a mark of a serious journal, rightly or wrongly. So we'll be able to do it in print. We'll be able to have an administrative assistant of part-time that we could hire if necessary, because we managed to get some funding, and Stanton Foundation's very much to their credit.
So anybody who doubts that we are done entirely impromptu with no preparation should just look at the appearance, disappearance, reappearance, disappearance, and reappearance of Genevieve De La Fera on the show today to ask a simple question or not.
Eugene, I want to introduce Genevieve, actually. I want to, sorry, I'm going to cut you off, Ben, so that I can introduce it. Genevieve is one of my former students, one of my very first students, and she now joins us regularly to have these conversations on In Lieu of Fun. It's really lovely.
And Genevieve, the floor is yours.
Hello.
This time for real.
No more magic? Oh.
We can make you disappear again if you want.
It's okay. Thank you for having me. Just a quick question. Do you anticipate any hesitancy from judges who have ambitions of higher office? I'm thinking about publishing opinions or endorsing opinions that may be held against them in confirmation hearings.
It's an interesting question. The fact is, most judges who are already circuit court judges are not going to be going on to higher office, just because most judges don't. Now, some of them may have ambitions. Some of them are also, let's just be realistic. I think they're of an age where they realize this is what they will be doing for the rest of their careers, certainly. And so I think for a lot of them, one of the great things about being, for example, a circuit judge is you can say, I've got a great job. I don't need to worry. That's one of the advantages of life tenure. And the flip side, by the way, is academics might be worried about such things too, right? If they're looking for higher office, either being appointed judges or moving on to a different school. My expectation is if this issue ever comes up, I think the answer is, we were on the editorial board. This is an editorial board of 30 people. It's not like all of us vote on this.
It's called the Free Speech Journal for a reason.
Right, and on top of that, not only is it not something that we were probably involved in a particular decision, but we aren't supposed to only publish things we agree with. Right? What kind of journal would it be that only publishes things that the entire editorial board or even one particular chunk of the editorial board agrees with? So I'm hoping that that's going to work. Human nature being what it is and politics being what it is, it might not be. But I think also one flip side is a lot of academics and a lot of judges, I think their view is, we've got tenure, one form or another of tenure, and, we shouldn't be too cautious.
Tenure is
right.
Tenure.
Right. We shouldn't be too cautious, and maybe some people are cautious, in which case they probably wouldn't join the board. But others would say, look, the right thing for me to do, given all of these job protections that I already have, is not to worry too much to the point where I can't even participate in something, because who knows, maybe someone might complain and some senator or some Twitter mob or whatever else will say or do something. I think that that's the way many of the members think, and I'm very glad about that. And again, that's something that probably affects in many ways professors even more than judges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tony Cava, the floor is yours.
Hello. Thanks for taking my question, and thanks for coming aboard, Professor Volokh. Is that the right pronunciation?
Sure. There are many ways that English speakers pronounce my name, which I've learned not to get upset about.
Okay, great. Well, I don't want to ambush you with this question, but I wanted to ask you about.
But here goes.
Here it goes. Yeah, right. With all due respect, but I was going to ask you about this use of the N-word and just kind of the use of offensive language. And
sure.
I kind of did some reading up on your position, and And I can understand the, sometimes you have to name the unnameable or name, call it by its name in order to talk about it. But I guess my question, I'm going to read it so I don't blow it, but I guess my question is it really impossible to discuss cases revolving around offensive content without giving voice to that content? What is lost by avoiding language deemed offensive by those outside the power structure? And conversely, what is gained by insisting on using that language? And finally, is there a risk of excluding the powerless from the conversation by insisting on using language that they find destructive?
Sure. So yeah, this is a controversy I've been involved in. Randy Kennedy and I have an article forthcoming explaining our position. Um,
Which
so,
is what, by the way?
which is that when there is a case that contains some epithet, could be fag, could be whatever else, could be the slants, as in metal vitam, we talk about that in the classroom and in our articles without euphemism, without circumlocution. And there are many reasons to do that. One of which is, you'd think that this is a question that has arisen before and has arisen before on the part of judges and the part of lawyers. And you'd be right, it has been. And the profession that we're grooming students to join is one in which routinely, in fact, in the great bulk of the cases, not uniformly, but in the great bulk of the cases, judges quote accurately words, including offensive words, from the record. And by routinely, I mean tens of thousands of times. Do a Westlaw search for a wide variety of epithets. You're going to see literally tens of thousands of cases in which judges say that. Some of which are tremendously significant cases. So, for example, there's Snyder v. Phelps, which involved the near funeral picketing, and the most offensive sign there was "God hates fags." It isn't "God hates FA**S." They quoted it accurately. And these are not just some sort of weird conservatives. This is Justice Sotomayor, Justice Ginsburg, also conservatives, Justice O'Connor, Justice Thomas. You look at pretty much if you imagine any set of, let's say, a dozen judges you most admire, and then you search through their opinions to see if they've actually quoted those words literally, without expurgation, I'm almost certain you will find several within that set, including kind of liberal luminaries. So first you might ask why. Why do they do this when, of course, they could have expurgated, right?
Eugene, before
Yes.
you continue,
Yeah.
is your microphone rubbing against your face at all?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
That wouldn't
just
be
go
good.
like that slightly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Good.
continue.
Got it. So in any case, so why? I think part of the answer is that in the law it is seen as really important to talk about the facts of the record and the facts of the precedent as they actually are. And I think that if this is something that illustrious judges like that believe is important in a court opinion, it seems to me it's also important in a discussion of the court opinion. That words that can be said in a courtroom and are routinely said in courtrooms, and words that are routinely written in court opinions should be discussable in the university, in the department that studies those opinions. The second point, which is I think related, is not only is it that it's permissible, I think it would be ill-advised for faculty to kind of build up in students the expectation or give in to students' expectations that they're somehow entitled not to hear these words. Because again, we're grooming these people to be lawyers. They go into certain fields. They have to hear the words. They have to write the words. They have to say the words. Not always. You have to listen. You have to understand your audience, but you have to be prepared to do that. You do a search through the briefs database on Westlaw. You will find thousands of briefs by public defenders, by the ACLU, by the NAACP, by all of those groups which accurately use those words. So to the extent that students come into law school, and law is the field I'm most familiar with on this, although we also in our article talk about other departments, but especially to the students come into law taking the view that, well, they're entitled to be shielded from that, I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to resist that and say, this is not the norm of the legal profession that you're about to enter. The norm of the legal profession is that you have to be prepared to hear and read and discuss words as they're actually written. And I think we would be doing a disservice to law students of all races, or all sexual orientations, religions, sexes, whatever else, by essentially endorsing for them the proposition that somehow the standard norm of the legal profession is somehow something horrible that they need to be protected from. So that's my view. That's Randy's in my view. I should make sure I give him credit.
And where is that article forthcoming?
It is forthcoming in a law review, but you can find it online. I will say, unfortunately, one of the consequences of the way things have been happening politically is I'm reluctant to mention the law review because while I think it takes a lot of guts for the law review to publish this article, I don't want to make their job harder by having people start some sort of boycott, threat campaign, or whatever else. I'm not sure that that's what would happen,
No,
but suffice
probably
it to
it would.
say you can. Yeah, suffice it to say, if you search for Kennedy Volokh epithets quoting classroom, you're going to find the article. I can include a link, or I can forward you a link. Can I post a link in here?
Yeah,
Of course.
Okay, and then within probably 2 to 3 months, you're going to find it in print.
I'm just gonna. I think that there is. I take your point, especially about the sensitivity and the realities of practicing law, and the fact that law school is a professional school first and foremost. That you're teaching people to go out and defend people and to deal with hard facts. I have friends right now who are teaching criminal law who are regularly getting like emails from students that are like, is there still going to be blood? Are we going to be talking about blood and like murder when we go over homicide? And it's like, well, yes, we like really are. They're like, well, we really don't like that. And well, what do you think happens in like the real world? Like there is blood and homicide, and if occasionally you're going to have to actually defend those people or prosecute them or listen to them as a judge and hear what they have to say. And so no, I take your point to that very, very very well, but I don't think, to your point, that the N-word is something that is said in regular discourse anymore. And I don't think many judges or people would go out of their way to say it in the context of a courtroom. And so it doesn't really make sense to me that you would go to such lengths, or that anyone would go to such lengths to kind of like, and I really do want to say that, like, I just think it is of a different kind than all of, maybe you think it's all a slippery slope, and I do tend to be a free speech absolutist in a lot of these things, but in this particular domain, I don't know why there is just, I have to say that I just kind of give in to like my intuition here, which is just that it just feels, and to the intuition of a lot of my friends, that it feels horrible to hear this word, and that it feels disempowering to hear this word, and that it has this rich and terrible history. And I don't know that people say this word in courts anymore. And so like I just kind of like, I don't understand why it's something that like you'd have to bring up in, I think that you could make the same point without bringing that up.
Well, so I appreciate your point. Certainly many people whom Randy and I respect take that view. It's not our view. I will tell you empirically, you look in the article and we generally focus just on the last 20 years, but you can find the same thing focused on the last 5 years. That in fact, this word is routinely written in opinions. It is routinely said in trials and in depositions and in various other contexts.
Is it said in its full form or in the
Yes.
abbreviated form?
No. I'm focusing on that, and as best we can tell, generally the full form is more common than the abbreviated form by roughly a factor of 3 to 1. As to the slippery slope concerns, it's funny just how quickly the slippage that we predicted, that people were telling us, oh no, it's not going to happen, how quickly it happened. When we first wrote the article, one of the things people said was just this one word. We had to recast the article as being both about and about fag, because we have now found that people have been demanding that professors, for example, talking about Snyder v. Phelps, not say God hates fags. And we see other examples of where people object to quotes of the word Negro, for example, as well as
That
various
happened
other
to me.
things. Right. So that's one level of slippage. Another thing, a colleague of mine said, oh, well, I would distinguish, she said, I distinguish speaking from writing. And it's one thing if you write. If you want to write it, that's fine. But speaking, you really shouldn't speak it. And then, ever since we wrote the article, we've seen example after example where the same kind of outrage mobs arose with regard to it being written as well. Another example, which if we had come up with, people would have said that's ridiculous, straw man. In USC just last fall, a professor was taken out of the classroom, taken out of teaching a class, which is a very unusual thing for a variety of reasons in class, because in the course of discussing filler words in Mandarin, because he was a Mandarin speaker and among other things specializes in Sino-U.S. business relations. So this is USC Business School. He gave as an example that the common filler word in Mandarin is nege. It's like and r. It means that, but people would routinely say it just as kind of like they'd say nega, nega. And the objection was that it sounds just like the slur. And because of that, even though in context it was perfectly clear that he was speaking Mandarin, which is a fluent speaker. It's one of the marks of a fluent speaker is you don't really focus on the sound of what you're saying because you just say it. Another example that, again, if we had come up with as a hypothetical, people would have mocked us for coming up with unrealistic hypotheticals. In University of Illinois at Chicago Law School, on a test, one of the questions in the civil procedure test involved involved a hypothetical where a plaintiff was complaining that she had been called an N dash 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 and B dash dash dash. The dashes were in the hypothetical, were on the exam. And that led to denunciation on the part of the school because even the expurgated version is enough. So that's why I think Randy and I take the view that it's important to draw the line at the basic principle, which is again the one that our legal system has long adhered to, and people left, right, and center, both on the bench and in the bar, which is that the fact that you can't use a word to insult people doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with mentioning it in discussing the facts of a case.
Okay, so I want to ask you, you have now used this word twice today on the show, and have
mentioned
done
it, quoted it, yes.
Yeah, not used it in a, but referred to its existence by pronouncing it. I think is,
Right.
And you have apparently done so without fear.
Yes.
And with the full knowledge that there are two prominent recent cases of people who have lost jobs at major media organizations for such behavior.
Yes.
And I'm curious whether you're doing this is a kind of statement of solidarity? Is it a trying to live the value that you are referring to in your piece with Randy Kennedy? Is it a political statement? What or is it just a behaving as you would want the world to behave? How do you?
Right.
How do you, and why do you not fear consequences? Obviously, you're tenured, so you're not going to have, job consequences, but you might very well have social consequences or Twitter cancellation consequences. So like, why no fear associated?
Well, of course I fear the consequences. I'll tell you. You mentioned the media, but there's a professor at Central Michigan University who, in discussing one of the leading cases on campus speech codes, which uses the word, I believe, 19 times. If I'm wrong, it's maybe 14 times. I'm not sure. Quoted it in the course of that, from an opinion, by the way, by a prominent black judge, Damon Keith, and he's been fired, tenured faculty member, department chair of the journalism department at Central Michigan University has been fired. This could happen to me. I just think that professors should not give in to such fear, because I think there's a reason we have tenure. And the reason we have tenure is that we're supposed to do what we think is right. Now, you may disagree with me that this is right, but again, I co-wrote a long article on why I think this is right. And I'll tell you one of the things, and again, this just came up after the original draft was written. There's a case called Liebenguth. It's in the Connecticut Supreme Court, and it involved fighting words. And in the course of the opinion, you can pull up the opinion. This was from last year, from last summer. Quotes the word 50 times. You listen to the oral argument, you will find judges quoting the word 6 times. And one of the things that the judge actually mentions, one of the judges actually mentions when he first brings this up, he says, look, the lawyers in this case are so studiously avoiding saying the word. Aren't you sort of admitting that this is somehow a sui generis category? And he was asking the lawyer for the defendant, who definitely didn't want to do that. So if I were in a position where I would say essentially, look, I'm going to talk around this, I'm going to expurgate this, then it seems to me people would, and I've been in conversations where people have said, oh, well, you yourself are admitting this, right? So it's sort of no-win in this kind of situation, which is fine by me. I just think that when we are academics talking about a case or a set of cases or a controversy, we should talk about it actually, literally. And I should say that's true regardless of our races, regardless of races of the listeners. I will say I've certainly talked to many people of all races, some who have had very different views on the subject, but black professors and black students who share my view, and white professors and white students who disagree with that. And to the extent that people are saying, "Oh, this is something that's so harmful to the listeners, to the students of supposedly disempowered groups," I think if you're going to be a lawyer, then I think you need to hear this, and you need to be able to talk about these things. I don't think it is that harmful for people. I think the important thing is to reinforce the notion that the things that you will hear often in this profession, as in many other worthy professions, could be social work, could be psychiatry, could be policing, are going to be often things that are very unpleasant because they reflect unpleasant aspects of the world, and you need to be able to deal with them, and that's part of our jobs, is to convey that message.
I have one additional question before we go to David Botts and Richard Wattenbarger's question to close out the show, which is, do you think we should put a label on the YouTube version of this show that says this show contains pronunciation by the guest of the N-word?
It's up to you. It's your show, your label. I think that So I listened to this podcast by John McWhorter and Lexicon Valley.
Yeah, we had him on the show recently.
He was just on a couple weeks ago.
He's fantastic. I love to listen to him.
He's amazing.
And they have occasionally this thing. This podcast contains offensive language, usually having to do with other vulgarities, sort of words like fuck and the like, which naturally he talks about because he's a linguist. And if he wants to do that, that's fine. I don't think this is something that in a podcast aimed at adults who are going to be listening to either things about language or law, that it ought to be something that people do, but it's your call.
Yeah.
David Botts, the floor is yours.
And your cats.
This is Luke. Luke says hi. Thanks for bringing me on, Ben. And Professor, many people are of the opinion, nobody watching here probably, and certainly not the people on the screen, but some people think that getting bounced off of Twitter or Facebook is equivalent to a violation of their First Amendment rights. And what is your favorite way of explaining that situation to particularly a non-lawyer?
Well, so I think there are two components to this. So
Great
one
question.
is, I do think I'm a big believer in the state action doctrine. And I say, look, the first word of the First Amendment is Congress. Congress shall make no law. 14th Amendment starts with no state shall. Okay, the government can't restrict speech. Twitter is not the government. Therefore, it's not a First Amendment violation. On the other hand, I think it's also important to realize that free speech isn't coextensive with the First Amendment. So you might say there is a serious free speech problem with platforms kicking people off, even if it's not a First Amendment problem. So one way of thinking about it is, imagine a phone company were to say, we just don't like what you're using your phone line for. We know that you're recruiting for the KKK, so we're just going to cancel your phone line. I think we might say that's a free speech problem. It's not a First Amendment problem, but it's a free speech problem, especially when there are multiple, where all the phone companies, all the cell phone companies are doing that, or at least the ones that are really prominent. That could undermine free speech. You could also say that that's something that is not the proper role for a large business enterprise. So in a sense, remember the Citizens United debate, where people were saying it's wrong for large business enterprises to even express their views about candidates for office. Well, if you think that that's bad for democracy to have business advertisers have such power, maybe it's bad for democracy, bad for marketplace of ideas, bad for democratic self-government, to have Twitter and Facebook have the power to just remove someone from their platform, which is not quite a monopoly, at least something that is kind of close to a monopoly in its market niche. These are interesting questions, and I'm not at all sure that we should be particularly upset about Twitter and Facebook exercising such power. This having been said, I think it's also not as simple as saying, well, there's no First Amendment violation. I totally agree there's no First Amendment violation, but we might ask, to what extent should we be concerned about free speech questions here, even if they're not First Amendment questions? Let me just close by giving one analogy. So we know the First Amendment limits government employers' power to fire employees based on their speech. It doesn't completely preclude it, but limits it. We also know the First Amendment says nothing about private employers for the very same reason. But about half the states have statutes of one form or another. California has a very broad such statute that limit private employers' power to fire employees for their political activity, which often includes a wide range of speech. Why? I think a similar concern that you don't want private employers, even though they are often much less monopolistic in their markets, you don't want private employers to be able to leverage their economic power to restrict speech. Not identical by any means to the Twitter, Facebook question. And obviously about half the states don't have such laws, so maybe they're the ones who are in the right. But I do think these are important things for us to talk about and think about it. And it's certainly possible that there are real problems with these platforms be exercising such power, even if we totally acknowledge that it's not a First Amendment violation.
Absolutely. Yes, without a doubt. You're muted, Ben.
Richard Wattenbarger, you get the last question today.
Okay, I'll try not to mime my response or my question. So,
I'll just mime while you're asking your question.
actually, the first time I was on, we had no sound, and I did mime my question. So as long as we're talking about the First Amendment and academic freedom, my question really is concerned with public universities and what professors can say and why we don't see, First Amendment litigation around questions of academic freedom. So if a professor says something in a class that riles people up and he faces some sort of sanction, why don't we see that sort of thing litigated and under, on First Amendment terms?
Well, the answer is we sometimes do. It may very well be that Central Michigan case, which I think the professor's name I think is Boudreau, I think that may be going to court. I don't know. I think one reason we don't see a lot of litigation about it is that in fact most public universities and most other universities too do give their faculty members very broad discretion. within the classroom, and do not, generally speak, punish their professors for what they say. It's not always so, but it is generally so. So as a result, not a lot of such incidents. When the incidents happen, not a lot of them come to court. When they come to court, not a lot of them lead to published opinions because there may be settlements and the like. This having been said, there was a case some 20 years ago, I want to say Hardy from the Sixth Circuit, which in fact involved a professor who was disciplined for, in fact, I think his contract was not renewed. It was in a community college because he quoted various epithets, a set of them, in his class discussions, and the court held in favor of the professor. There was a case called Cohen v. San Bernardino Community College around the same time, in the Ninth Circuit case, where a professor was disciplined, I forget exactly in what way, whether he was fired or not, because he was using sort of sexual allusions and examples, I think, in his English class. And that was... that came down on basically vagueness grounds, that the policy that he was he was faulted for violating wasn't clear enough on the subject. So occasionally you do see these cases. By the way, it is an interesting First Amendment question to what extent a administration can tell faculty members what they can say in class. I don't think it's open and shut. There certainly are cases that say that academic freedom, including the freedom to teach, is protected by the First Amendment. But there are also perfectly plausible arguments saying, look, you're hired to teach a subject, and you could be required to teach it in a particular way, or cover certain material, or whatever else. As
Judge Kleinfeld once put it, if you hire somebody to make a bust of Lincoln, you're allowed to not pay him if he makes a bust of Washington.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. So I do think it's an interesting question. This is, by the way, why Randy's in my article is not about the First Amendment rights or even academic freedom rights. Our position is that it is actually pedagogically sound to accurately quote material rather than expurgating it. And at the very least, that is a pedagogically sound approach, even if the alternative approach is too. We have a footnote about the First Amendment issue because, you need to mention that, but that's not our primary point.
Footnotes.
Right.
You need to slip in ass-covering footnotes to show you're aware of the issue.
Right. Because people will be curious, but that's not our primary point. So I do think it's a really interesting question. I will tell you, generally speaking, the dominant view with regard to K through 12 education is indeed the teacher works for the school board, and the school board can tell them, and the principal can tell the teachers, look, teach it this way and not that way. But for universities, there's something more of a sense, right or wrong, and not completely uniform, that the professor would have more discretion.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to leave it there.
We're going to leave it there. Eugene Volokh, thank you for joining us.
I'm so excited for your new journal. And this is going to be great. And the symposium that's going to come out in all about it. And I'm just like, it's a journal of free speech is very much what the world needs right now.
And
that's what we like to think.
We will be back tomorrow with John Villasenor, also of UCLA.
Go Bruins!
It's a big week for UCLA.
I know.
We've got Christine Enba joining us from the Washington Post on Wednesday. We got a blank still on Thursday, but on Friday, I am told we will finally have John Lovett to debate me on time reform. He can only join for 20 minutes, but he'll be at the top of the hour to
fight
duke
with you
it
about
out.
Universal time.
Can I just make my little pitch about time reform? The real problem, there's not enough of it. I think we should reform it to have more time.
So this is the point. Just think how much time we could gain if nobody ever had to do conversions of, based on time differences between places. Think of those added seconds that you would get if when you talked to somebody in Botswana, you just said, hey, we'll talk at 11. And the person in Botswana didn't have to say, what is that for me? and you're like, well, I don't know, because I don't know what the time conversion factor is between Southern California and Botswana, and that person wouldn't have to say, I'm 5 hours or whatever of Botswana is.
I don't know why
you just have to
it's
say
20.
11. Think how much time you would add.
To your point, though, Eugene, I think that,
Seconds.
like, I can't believe it's 2021 and we haven't solved sleep yet. Like, why do we still need
I'm
sleep?
totally with you on that.
Like,
Totally with
why,
you on that.
like, why is this a thing? Like, I mean, like, we do enjoy it, but, like, couldn't we cure our
We
enjoyment
don't
of it?
enjoy it.
Yes, we
don't
need it.
because we don't really
We need
experience
it.
it. We
I
need it. We
know.
enjoy having slept, but the actual sleep itself. Yeah, I am so with you. This
Okay.
should be. We should stop. Quit whatever our jobs are. Quit what
And
we're doing and focus on
solve
something
sleep.
important like that.
We will be back tomorrow to start on that very project. 22 hours and 48 minutes from now. And until then, KK,
We don't have fun anymore, but at least, or unfortunately, we still have sleep.